Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating, the Vice President of Product Strategy for Zimperium, and welcome to our webinar. These are one of my favorites. I love doing these where we get to actually kind of make our predictions and then come back and take a look and see how we do, how the industry does and how we do against some of these predictions. So classic standard stuff. We'll run through slides. We're going to try and keep it to you in about 20 minutes or so. The primary objective behind all of this is really just to get people thinking, to get people wondering and pondering certain things. Please put in any questions that you may have in the Q&A capabilities. We're not using the chat capabilities because we have a little bit of difficulty with it sometimes. So any questions you've got, even if it's technical, please just throw it in the Q&A section. This will be an archived version of this will be up on the site within a day or so. And if anybody's interested, we can also make slides available to you as well. So with that, we're going to get into the top predictions for 2019. I will put the standard disclaimer on this, which is these are basically my predictions. And they've obviously been vetted through lots of folks here, our threat labs guys, everything else. But this is kind of fun, and they're my predictions for 2019. So let's so obviously one of the main things here is that since they're predictions, obviously we don't have the data for them yet, but almost all of these are based on data that we have had and we've been discussing previously in 2018. So let's start with the big one. The big one is this. I predict that there will be over 10 billion mobile threats detected in 2019. Now, like I said, some of this is backed up by data, right? All of it is. Zimperium alone will detect over 2 billion threats in 2018. We see a very clear trend line and path to Zimperium alone detecting over 5 billion threats. And since we are the majority leader in the enterprise side of the market already, it's pretty easy and pretty simple and straightforward to say that hitting 10 billion is not unrealistic. And again, that's 10 billion that are detected. When we start getting into some of these things, there's still going to be a lot of endpoints that aren't protected and therefore don't have detection, which obviously would make that number much larger as mobile security penetration continues to occur. So it's big. The related part is every single industry will be attacked. Again, even though it's a prediction, it's based on data. The reason I can make this prediction with great confidence is because 100% of Zimperium's customers have detected threats. And those customers, as some of our previous webinars have run through, cover almost every industry you could think of. Here's just some of the ones that we did webinars on. Everything from law firms, consulting firms, healthcare to financial services, city governments, federal governments, oil and gas, electric utilities, just across the board, including, like we said, some that ordinarily would not be ones that you would expect, A, to invest in protection, which is interesting by itself, and then B, to actually be targeted in any way, shape, or form. Simple fact is, if you've got any assets or physical assets and systems or information that has any value to somebody, you can be targeted, and especially targeted via mobile, because for the vast majority of mobile today, they're in the hands of the end users and there's no security on them. So it's a very logical place to attack, which we'll spend some more time on. So billions of threats across every single industry is kind of predictions, kind of 1 and 2. Related to that, these threats are just going to continue to become mainstream news. For those folks that attended our 2018 webinar last week, this slide probably looks kind of familiar to you. The interesting thing about this is these are all mainstream publications that have already written about mobile security. And the interesting kind of side note is these are all ones that have already written about Zimperium. So there's already a whole bunch of mainstream. What you don't see on here, even though it's already covered in there, is dark reading, SC Magazine, security-centric publications, CSO. the point behind this is mobile attacks and mobile threats are absolutely mainstream news now, and will continue being even more so. And I think a kind of an instant corollary point here is not just nation state stuff. A lot of times there's a lot of articles about whether, a particular elected official's phone is secure, or one nation versus another, that kind of stuff. This is actually mainstream corporate coverage will occur throughout 2019. There will be more major breaches via mobile. A lot of people kind of didn't hear about this one. This was Tesco, and this just happens to be one example where Tesco, a mobile app, opened the door, and this says 2.5 million pounds of customers' money were stolen, gone, vanished. Of course, Tesco repaid the money back to the customers, but that means that Tesco had to eat that. There's a lot more out there. In 2019, we're going to see major mainstream brands, mobile apps getting attacked. And those breaches are going to become very, very public information. Same time, governments have already started setting the tone for bringing down the hammer. A lot of times we'll talk about some compliance mandates and things, and it'll be, kind of, well, there might sort of be kind of fines and blah, 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 blah. One of the main things we're seeing here is that governments are really getting serious now with this. So in this particular case, as you can see, it was 2.26 when they actually went back and looked at it, million pounds. The fine was 8 times that amount. So it's big dollars, and the governments are making a statement. You have to protect your customers. So this is mobile app centric. I'm going to, in a minute, pivot over to protecting employee devices. But right now, people a lot of times are like, well, everything seems kind of safe, right? And no, things are not safe. A related point behind this whole thing is securing mobile apps is going to become an absolute requirement. And if you look here, as we leave this year, over 70%, whereas 56% of the transactions are being done on mobile as we leave 18, over 70% of the fraud is mobile. So you start putting those pieces together and you're like, okay, obviously these breaches are already occurring. We're just now starting to learn about them. The governments, when they hear about them, are bringing down the hammer. Now, even the business case even if you assume that people didn't care about privacy and customer data, they do care about fraud. And so protecting mobile apps is going to be critical. Now, what's already occurred is people have, major organizations have done the lower tiers of Maslow's hierarchy of app protection. They've started with encrypting the network. They started with making sure that the APIs and stuff are as secure as they could possibly be. They've moved to app shielding and app hardening, checking vulnerabilities in their own apps and the like. What they haven't done yet is, most of them, we're going to talk more about this later, they haven't actually protected their app from the ugliness of the consumer devices that they're sitting on, because those consumer devices have no protection. So you're basically putting your house on shifting sand. So they have to extend it back out, because 70+% of the fraud is on mobile. So this is going to be a major thrust, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Related to this and related to the government fines, personal data protection. In 2018, we saw compliance mandates starting to hint at mobile being an endpoint, and as an endpoint, it needs to be secured. 2019, that's going to be just a straight up fact. If you have any personal data, any cardholder data, any patient data, any on mobile endpoints, you're going to have to secure them just like you would any endpoint. And we're already seeing auditors doing this, but it was the early stages, like the early adopter auditors that are saying, wait a minute, it doesn't make any sense that there's a difference between putting patient data on a tablet and patient data on a laptop. It's the same data. We have to protect it. Now it's being extended. And then with things like GDPR, PSD2, the NDB down in Australia. It's just continuing to ramp up on the privacy data as well. And the fact, what do customers own of their own data? This is just going to continue to go nuts. I also think an equal prediction here which is kind of a blinding flash of the obvious of BFO, is that people are still going to be confused by what they do and don't have to do on things like GDPR or on PSD2 and the payment side of the world. But they're going to have to catch on to that pretty quickly because the auditors are going to tell them what they need to do. And that's not a mobile comment. That's across the board with every new, heavily pushed, promoted, and aggressive compliance mandates. So I mentioned I was going to pivot back over to the employee side. So that set of stuff really had to do with mobile apps and the enterprises providing mobile apps and the fact that there's going to be breaches, et cetera. The other part is, what about the employees, right? Well, enterprise mobility, the scale of it is still going to continue to go nuts. And while, again, this is kind of a BFO, blinding flash of the obvious, it's kind of like, okay, well, all right, so you're telling me mobile is going to continue increasing and increasing and increasing in terms of both the number of devices as well as the access onto the corporate network. That's not much of a prediction, right? Well, the thing that makes it an relatively interesting prediction is that a lot of security and mobility teams or IT teams in enterprises still haven't really come to grips with the fact that 2/3 of the devices accessing their network are mobile. 2/3 of them are managed by the user. 2/3 of them, in terms of operating system updates, 2/3 of them, the user decides what network they're going to connect to, and it's outside of the corporate network. 2/3 of them, they decide what apps can be downloaded. So a lot of companies have kind of taken a, well, if we don't know it, it can't hurt us kind of mindset. And that is going to change in 2019. They're not going to have a choice because they're going to have to address this for compliance purposes or anything else. This is one that we did a webinar on just a little while ago with a very talented pen tester out of Italy that showed, and you can download on our site and also download his white paper. It showed how his basic job was, he was tasked by a major bank to say, we want you to steal some data, obviously not steal, but exfiltrate it to act like it was being stolen. We want you to exfiltrate some data. The only condition is it has to start with an employee. They started with a phishing attack, which employees were well trained because they happened to come in a week after they did phishing training. So, okay, well done. That didn't work. Ultimately, they did the entire thing via an Android attack and used that Android to compromise a device to be able to pivot into the enterprise, then to move servers, and then ultimately to have complete domain access and exfiltrate the data. The hackers are already doing this. The hackers have multiple things that they're time tested, one of which is land and expand. You go after the weakest link and you make your way in. We've seen it's been time tested. I mean, a few years ago, there were point of sale terminals in hotels, particularly in franchise hotels, or it was the HVAC manufacturer in the Target example, right? Now, you have all of these devices that are coming in and out of the network all the time that are being controlled by these users that make bad decisions anyway, that don't have any security on them. So they literally are the perfect place to land. And then once you come inside the network, expand. So in 2019, that's just going to continue. All the data is going to bear it out. And the pen testers are going to continue to prove it as well for those folks that are still a little bit, dubious about the whole thing. Speaking of breaches and speaking of humans making bad decisions, mobile phishing is absolutely going to lead to breaches again. I mean, there's no doubt. And it has already. So again, this is somewhat of a BFO. 90% of the breaches, according to Verizon, is actually greater than 90% last year, started with a phishing attack. Well, over 2/3 of emails are opened on mobile devices. So we are constantly talking with customers. If you think about it, phishing is so much easier on mobile you have a smaller screen, you've got a whole bunch of other things that make it very, very likely and very, very susceptible. Mobile phishing is without question going to be a major issue in 2019. There's zero doubts about it. In my mind, it's, again, right up there with the whole BFO side of things. So as people are going after these folks and going after the compromising of the device and everything, phishing is absolutely going to be a major one. And I think it's important to note that when you get a phishing email and you click on it, not only is there a possibility of stealing your credentials right then and there, but you're now on a web page. And so that web page is going to be processed. If there is an exploit that is available for that device, which there likely is, because over two-thirds of devices are at least an operating system or two behind on mobile, because the user is the one who decides whether they're going to update or not. And they like to say, well, I'm not going to do it because it slows things down, or the last time I did it, it ate my battery or whatever. So they don't update. So when that website hits, it can deliver an exploit just as easily as it can steal credentials. And they've now compromised the device, which is the ultimate objective of the hackers. iOS. 2018, we talked about the fact that security professionals finally really came to grips with the fact that iOS, as great as it is a platform. And as a computing platform, it is susceptible to attacks. Apple has done a very good job of vetting apps in the App Store. Now, one of the things that is really critical in mobile is all apps are in containers, meaning they're in their own buckets, and apps cannot interact with other apps. So in order for bad guys to actually take over a device and own that device, they have to elevate privileges and compromise the device in some way, shape, or form. The vast majority, like 90+% of attacks that we see against an enterprise start with a network attack or maybe a phishing attack. They do not start with malicious apps. So, but even if they do, then the goal is to elevate privileges. So we've had these mobile menaces that we talk about all the time. The simple fact is, Apple does have an inherent advantage in the way that they're doing things and the way they're processing things on mobile apps relative to Android. But the other major attacks, it is equally susceptible. And we saw the security professionals starting to come to grips with that in 2018. In 2019, even Apple's going to have to come to grips with it. And Apple already knows, we work with Apple, but the fact is, over half of our 70 million endpoints around the world are iOS. So people are already protecting them. We're already detecting those billions of threats. Don't be misled just by the app part, because the others, including particularly profiles, are a major issue for Apple. A related promotion or prediction is 2019 is going to be the year of the profile. People are going to start to understand that profiles are the easiest way to compromise an iOS device. What a profile is, for those folks that don't know, is Apple, because apps can't play with other apps, Apple created this concept of a profile, which is a configuration change on your device for legitimate apps that need to actually have basically elevated privileges to be able to go across apps. Two simple examples are MDMs, mobile device management, where it needs to manage device, needs to be able to take actions across the device, or VPN. You want to be able to encrypt traffic from every app that's sending things across, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the bad guys have figured this out. And since Apple has done such a great job on the App Store, but the bad guys still want to get on iOS because of the market share, particularly in corporations, which is what we're designed to protect, the bad guys trick people into installing profiles that can do whatever they want. I mean, we've seen profiles that have, sent traffic to foreign countries. We've seen, all sorts of different things. People are starting to understand it. 2019, they'll understand it for sure, because we will see attacks and breaches that are coming from devices that have been compromised with rogue profiles. This is one that I actually thought about making in 2018, and I probably should have, but I might have been wrong. But I don't think I'm going to be wrong in 2019. I'm not sure if you all remembered that a couple of years ago, Brian Krebs, the outstanding reporter, security reporter, was hit with a DDoS attack, distributed denial of service. It was the largest one in history at the time. And it leveraged IoT devices and mobile devices. We're going to see that in 2019. There are so many of these devices that are out there that are compromised, that are owned by these bad guys that now can be part of any kind of a network, a botnet. And the ability to prevent a DDoS from that many endpoints is very, very difficult. Now, Akamai did an incredible job when Krebs got hit, and I'm sure they will again, and their brethren, but we're still going to see it. We're still going to see attempts that come from compromised devices. Kind of going along this line now. So whether it's mobile apps or whether it's employee devices, there's billions of threats that are going to be hitting these mobile devices. And there's all sorts of different ramifications, whether it's being used as a botnet or whether it's personal data or whatever the case may be, that corporate data, client data, across all these industries. That's what we talked about. So with that, finally, beforehand, mobility, because of MDMs, were the primary mobile device management. The IT or mobile guys were the primary guys. I agree 100% with Gartner here, 100%, because of what we're seeing in our customers. One of the biggest changes in 2018 that was a tipping point, and then 2019 will just make it where it never turns back, if you ask me. Beforehand, a lot of security teams were not as involved in any of the mobility stuff. They were somewhat involved in MDM, maybe a little bit, but way in the back of the train. And they weren't involved at all in the mobile apps. That was a totally separate group that was outside of most CISO organizations, right? As we move into 2019, that's not the case anymore. It's too important, it's too expensive. So security is going to go front and center. When it comes to mobile MTD, or mobile threat defense, as Gartner calls it, that's the ones that are actually designed to protect employees and bring everything together as the primary. Security is, without question, being the main buying center. As we look over towards the mobile app side of things, first, security, at least for mobile apps, we're seeing this, security is being built into the dev teams now. It's not something where it's like at the very end, just kind of throw some stuff at it, or maybe just do a quick check. When it comes to mobile apps, we are seeing security being embedded in the dev team, and it's a part of the agile process. And in 2019, that's going to be unquestioned. You're going to have to do it that way because of all the data we were talking about, 70+% of the fraud and everything like that. You got to get ahead of it. And the leading companies, our customers on the mobile app side, security is embedded in dev. And the related corollary is once those apps go out, DevSecOps is actually a reality in mobile in 2019. Again, we've seen early adopters in 2018, but all of our customers that are stepping it up and actually protecting their mobile apps, it is actually DevSecOps now. So when it's actually out there, security and the ability to monitor, manage, and make decisions based on the security parameters is actually part of the organization and will be going forward. And I don't see any reason to believe that that's ever going to go back the other direction. Because of all of this, traditional endpoint protection or EDR, endpoint detection response companies, right, depending on what term you want to throw at it, the EPP EDR companies have already started, some of them have already started moving into address mobile. All of them will have to have mobile in 2019. It is going to be an absolute competitive imperative. Even if you look at the Forrester endpoint wave recently, it was a major criteria. Do you have a mobile solution on it? That was out during the summer. It's a really good document by Chris Sherman and company. So, it is going to be an absolute imperative. And you've seen some movements. Symantec acquired a company. McAfee is partnered with us. You've seen movements in that direction already. All of them are going to have to play going forward. Now, I just decided to have a little bit of fun, and this is not from any inside information whatsoever, but related to this whole thing, I just think it's kind of fun. I think McAfee's going to go back to being public in 2019. And I assure you, I am nowhere near the buying, the center of the universe of McAfee. So this is not anything from an inside side. I just think they're going to. I think the indications, I think the trend lines, I think the growth, I think the moves that Chris Young has been making, they're going to be set up really nicely to go public. It's related to mobile because they happen to be selling mobile now as a part of their overall endpoint suite, Envision Mobile. And Envision is their cloud-based solution that is really catching on, and Envision Mobile is a component of that, which is why it's in here. But I also just think it's kind of cool to see whether McAfee actually, returns again. So there's my one, kind of couple of business predictions right there. Another one though is we actually think that one traditional IT vendor, a major IT vendor, at least one, is going to completely buy into security. We've seen some people kind of dabble in it again, a little bit here and there. I think in 2019, there's so many interesting converging lines, including mobility and brand new platforms and everything, that I think at least one major IT vendor will buy into security in a big way. I just wanted to put Pac-Man in because I just thought that was kind of fun. So, a couple last predictions here. This one I think is kind of interesting. 2019, there will be no question that you have to do almost all of your detection, if not all of your detection, on device. We saw a little bit of a tipping point. We've always been this way. The reason that the network attack is circled here or squared is we've always believed, and our data has borne it out without question, that if a hacker is targeting a company, they're going to start with a network attack. They're going to sit in a coffee shop. They're going to wait till they find somebody from XYZ company that they're targeting. And then they're going to deliver some form of an exploit or rogue profile or something in order to compromise that device and own that device. They're not just going to drop an app in the App Store and pray somebody downloads it, right? Because the bad guy controls the network, you can't rely on the network to take you to your detection source in the cloud. It won't work. We said that from the very beginning. We saw in 2018 a movement of all the MTD vendors to try and start messaging that way, to try and start putting some deterministic known bad threats on the device. In 2019, it's going to be a competitive imperative, not a differentiator. You have to be on device. Now, how you do it on device will be a differentiator. As you guys probably know, this has been our thing from the very beginning. We're the ones that do zero-day machine learning-based detection of attacks on device because we don't trust the network. And the machine learning part is because we've learned from history that just having signatures of deterministic known bad attacks is not going to help you, because that's not what's going to be used in a targeted attack. It's going to be something that is unique and tweaked and modified, and you need to be ahead of the curve. Our engine, Z9, has detected every single major device exploit that has been known since 2014 on device without an update. That's what's required. And that's what the rest of the industry is catching up to. Z9 can be rolled out in one of two ways. This is the only product thing I'm going to talk about, but just kind of helps set up some of the stuff we've been talking about. If you need to protect your employees and the devices and all the data that's on those devices 100% of the time, you use what's called ZIPS, stands for Z Intrusion Prevention System. It is like next generation antivirus, EPP, whatever, strictly for mobile platforms and mobile devices, and it runs 100% of the time and protects your devices. If, however, you have one of those mobile apps that needs protecting, and you've tried shielding, you've tried encryption, you've tried all that, but you need to step the game up because you're putting that stuff onto really dirty consumer devices. For instance, we have an SDK that drops directly inside of any mobile app in a matter of minutes and is able to detect all the same things that Z9 was detecting in ZIPS. But in that case, you're not trying to protect the device 100% of the time. You're just trying to protect that app and the sessions that app is happening to help head off that 70+% fraud number, or, depending on what your application is, health data or whatever the case may be. So my last prediction is a kind of bold, but not really, because it's actually fact already. but it's still just kind of fun to put it in there. And I can put it in because I'm not personally, responsible for a whole bunch of this stuff. So and I don't feel bad bragging on it. And that is simply, we are just going to continue dominating this market. We have a blog that was posted by Nitin Bhatia, our chief product officer, a couple weeks ago, and it talks about how we're already scaling into the billions. I already talked about the 2 billion threats detected. We're processing 290 billion events a year, for instance. We're protecting 5 billion mobile sessions for people with apps, et cetera. So it's really not a huge prediction, but it was just a fun one for me to put in there because it's true. And we're just going to continue to distance ourselves. So with that, I will stop and see if anybody has any questions. Please use the Q&A. If you don't, which will not hurt me whatsoever, then I will give you folks some time back in your day. But thank you very much for listening to my predictions, which are always fun to do. And I promise to come back next year and tell you how we did against them. So I do not see any questions. I just want to thank you all very much. If you do have questions after the fact, I'm at jt.keating, Keating, at zimperium.com, and I'd be more than happy to answer them offline. So thank you very much. Have yourselves a great day.